First, in this cosmopolitanism, history is not taken as either a discipline or a form of knowledge which has a monopoly right on the construction of the past. There is a past outside history too. That past lives on myths, legends, epics, shared public memories, transmitted over generations, grandparents' tales, and so on. Past is plural. Not only the future, but past too is plural. It is not closed up. And that gives you a different kind of play, because as Bruno Latour would say, we can enter history only through our pasts. And an open past is absolutely vital to this kind of a cosmopolis. Do not forget that both the Cynic civilization and the Indic civilization have always located their utopias in the past, unlike in contemporary Europe and the modern societies in general, where utopias cannot be located in the past, they can be located only in the future. At one time it wasn't so. Garden of Eden also was an utopia. But since Sir Thomas More, nature of utopias have changed, we have different kinds of utopias we work with, but the result of closing up the past through history and absolutizing it to some extent also means that your options for the futures are increasingly closed. And that, if I may, in the context of what I have already said, would suggest that also limits the range of your tolerance. It is, at one time, it was perhaps not impolite in many societies to say that you do not like Vietnamese boat people. You do not like Governor Van Lee's looks or skin color. These have become very impolite things to say now. You could have said that you didn't like his Vietnamese food habits. You can no longer say that, but you can still say that Vietnamese and we are brothers. But what Vietnam is today, we were yesterday. And if Vietnam behaves well, reads the textbooks on development and progress we have produced, tomorrow Vietnam will be like us. In that sense, I suspect that you have closed the options of Vietnam in the future, and perhaps also in the present, because the Vietnamese are only living in their present. You have lived through this present and transcended it. You have become something better. So you know their present better than they can ever do. And of course, you know their future also better than they will ever do, because they are only going to enter the future in the future, whereas you are living out their future today. And I would, in conclusion, say that this also is a way of hijacking diversities in the future and in the present. Secondly, this is the second instance. In the kind of cosmopolis I want to invoke out of the past of many societies, diverse societies all over the world, radically diverse societies, I would also say that there is some kind of a fluidity between the sacred and the secular, the this worldly and the otherworldly. These are the communities where the sacred it gets telescoped into the secular, and the secular gets telescoped into the sacred. The gods are imperfect, the demons are imperfect too. And in any case, there are so many of them that you can not really talk of dissenting points of view, because everybody has a different kind of God. That is the normal part of the story. India is supposed to have 330 million gods and goddesses, and even the most devout Hindu and the greatest Hindu theologians will not be able to provide you with a list of all the 330 million. It is a notional concept, which is actually a way of saying that they are too diverse for you to know. And Shintoism has 8 million gods and goddesses, so it may not be a close second, but even I doubt whether Shinto priests in Japan will ever be able to enumerate them. And this is the reason that many times you will see a different kind of tolerance in these societies. In China, a huge majority of the Chinese are Confucians. A huge majority of them are also Taoists. And a huge majority of them are Buddhists. This is unimaginable in any civilized society. In Japan, the figures I know, 95%, more than 95% are Shintos, more than 85% are Buddhists. It will be very difficult to mobilize a Shinto-Buddhist conflict there. And I suspect that this is not an accident, that it is this concept of religion which stretched from Japan to the western borders of Africa and probably up to Central Asia. In India, we had a colonial census, and all the percentages of religious communities add up to a neat 100%. But when a study of communities was done in 92-93 by Indian Anthropological Society, it was found that 15% of Indians could be classified under more than one religion. There are 36 communities in India still which can be classified under 3 religions. There are communities which are simultaneously Hindu and Muslims. There are Muslim communities which trace their origin to the Mahabharata clans and perform the Mahabharata ritually. There are Brahmins called Hussaini Brahmins. The name itself would sound very strange to many Indians too. And these lead to a different kind of society, a different concept of ethnic boundaries, different concepts of religious boundaries, and somewhere, I believe, in this kind of a world, there is perhaps options. There are options which we have not explored in our concept of cosmopolis. Perhaps, I'm saying perhaps, we might be able to broaden and deepen our concept of democracy by acknowledging them. The person in whose name this lecture has been instituted was a person who was crucially involved, along with Desmond Tutu, with an experiment called, everybody knows about it, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's an ambitious, imaginative project, and today, in retrospect, many criticisms of it too are available. But at least one thing it did. It prioritized the testimony of witnesses over the forensics of culpability. A testimony opens up the future by establishing a dialogue not only between those outside your auditory range, but it opens up a dialogue between the dominant and the subordinate, between the oppressor and the oppressed, within a single ethical frame. A trial, which may be necessary in many circumstances, I'm not underestimating its importance, but a trial can only establish guilt. And while bringing the oppressed within the frame, within an ethical frame that recognizes the humanity of the oppressed, pushes the oppressor out of the frame of humanity. It absolutizes the difference between the two. Despite being aware of the many criticisms of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I also believe that it challenged our standardized concepts of the victims and perpetrators, the killers and the killed, the heard and the unheard, and what Dostoevsky called the anthropologists and the subjects of anthropology. I consider that a major challenge to our public ethics. I thank you for your patience and your kindness.